Sarah Chen wiped the sweat from her forehead as she guided her harvester through the endless rows of corn. The setting sun painted the Iowa sky in beautiful shades of orange and purple, marking another long day of work on her family's farm. 3 generations of Chens had worked this land, and Sarah took pride in carrying on their legacy. The old harvester's engine hummed steadily as she checked the time. 7:30 p.m. Just another hour of work, and she could finally call it a day. The autumn air was getting cooler, and she looked forward to a hot cup of tea and her comfortable armchair. That's when she saw it, a strange blue glow between the corn stalks, about 50 feet ahead. Probably some teenagers messing around with their phones, Sarah muttered to herself, slowing the harvester. But something felt different about this light. It pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm, like a heartbeat. Sarah stopped the machine and climbed down. She pulled out her flashlight, more out of habit than necessity, as the strange glow provided enough light to see by. As she pushed through the corn stalks, her boots crunching on fallen leaves, she heard a soft whimper. Her heart started beating faster. Was someone hurt? Or maybe an injured animal? Being the only farm for miles around, she often ended up helping lost pets or treating wounded wildlife. What she found made her drop her flashlight. Lying in a small crater about 6 feet wide was what looked like a person, but not quite. The creature was clearly female in form, but its skin shimmed with iridescent scales in various shades of blue and purple. Its hair, if you could call it that, looked like strands of starlight flowing in a non-existent breeze. It wore what appeared to be a damaged suit made of some kind of metallic fabric. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, taking a step back. Every sci-fi movie she'd ever watched told her to run away, call the authorities, do anything but get closer. The creature's eyes fluttered open, revealing pupils that seemed to contain swirling galaxies. She tried to move but winced in pain. A small cut on her forehead leaked silvery blood. Sarah Chen had never considered herself particularly brave or foolish. She was just a farmer, living a simple life in the middle of nowhere. But seeing this beautiful being in pain awakened something in her. The same instinct that made her rescue injured animals and help lost travelers. "Hey there," she said softly, kneeling beside the creature. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The being's eyes focused on her, showing intelligence and what seemed like relief. She tried to speak, but only strange musical sounds came out. Then her eyes rolled back, and she fell unconscious again. Sarah looked around. The crater had destroyed maybe 20 corn stalks. She'd worry about that later. Right now, this creature needed help. She couldn't leave her out here in the cold, and somehow calling the authorities felt wrong. They'd probably take her away to some secret facility, never to be seen again. "I must be crazy," Sarah muttered, then made her decision. With strength born from years of farm work, she carefully lifted the unconscious being. The creature was surprisingly light, almost as if gravity had less hold on her. Sarah carried her back to the harvester, grateful that her nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. The creature's skin gave off a faint warmth, and those scales felt smoother than anything she'd ever touched. As she drove home with her unusual passenger, Sarah tried to make sense of it all. She had a barn full of medical supplies for treating farm animals. That would have to do for now. Whatever this being was, wherever she came from, Sarah would help her heal. Little did Sarah know, but this evening would change not just her life, but the course of human history. The creature breathing softly beside her wasn't just any alien visitor. She was Princess Lara of the Celestial Dominion, and she had just accidentally found exactly what she'd been looking for on Earth. Sarah's old barn had seen many injured animals over the years, but never anything like this. She had laid the strange, scaled being on a clean bed of straw covered with soft blankets. The creature hadn't woken up during the drive back, but her chest rose and fell with steady breaths, and her skin still gave off that faint, warm glow. "Okay, Sarah muttered to herself as she gathered medical supplies. What would Dad do? Her father had taught her everything about caring for sick animals before he passed away last spring. Somehow, she didn't think his advice about treating horses would help much with an alien. The cut on the creature's forehead had already stopped bleeding that strange, silvery blood. Sarah carefully cleaned it anyway, noticing how the scales seemed to shift and ripple under her touch. The being made a soft, musical sound, almost like humming. Meanwhile, Princess Lara was fully conscious but unable to move much. Her emergency protocols had kicked in after the crash, putting her body into a healing trance. She could feel everything, though, and was fascinated by the humans' gentle care. On her world, robots handled all medical procedures. This hands-on approach was surprisingly pleasant. Sarah worked through the night, checking for broken bones, none that she could tell, treating small cuts, and making sure her guest stayed warm. By morning, she was exhausted but couldn't bring herself to leave. Instead, she pulled up an old wooden chair and watched the sunrise through the barn doors. A quiet rustling made her turn around. The creature was sitting up, those galaxy-filled eyes now alert and curious. Sarah held very still as the being looked around the barn, taking in the hanging tools, the scattered hay, and the morning light streaming through the windows. "Good morning," Sarah said softly, trying to appear friendly. "Are you feeling better?" The creature tilted her head and made those musical sounds again. Then she pointed to herself and made a series of complex tones that Sarah assumed was her name. "I'm Sarah," she replied, pointing to herself. "Sarah." Lara understood perfectly. Her partially functioning translator could receive Earth languages, but couldn't transmit her own yet. She found it endearing how the human was treating her like a simple creature, even while showing such care. In truth, Lara could have called for rescue immediately, but something made her hesitate. This was a unique opportunity to observe humans in their natural environment. The morning passed in a series of awkward but sweet attempts at communication. Sarah brought food, fresh eggs, toast, and coffee, and watched in amazement as her guest carefully copied her eating methods. The being seemed fascinated by everything, from the texture of the toast to the steam rising from the coffee cup. When Sarah had to go out to tend to the farm, the creature followed her. Lara watched with growing respect as the human worked tirelessly, caring for animals, checking equipment, and managing the vast fields of corn. On her world, machines did all this work. There was something beautiful about the direct connection this human had with her land. To Sarah's surprise, her new pet turned out to be incredibly helpful. Those delicate-looking hands were surprisingly strong, and the being seemed to understand how things worked almost instantly. Together, they fixed a broken tractor faster than Sarah could have alone. By evening, Sarah realized she was no longer afraid. Yes, this was probably an alien, but there was something so human about the way the creature watched her, helped her, and tried to communicate. They had developed a rhythm of sorts, working together as if they'd known each other for years instead of hours. What Sarah didn't know was that her guest was having similar thoughts. Lara had come to Earth expecting to find primitive beings barely worth the celestial dominion's attention. Instead, she had discovered something far more valuable: humanity's capacity for kindness, their adaptability, and their surprising wisdom. And in Sarah Chen, she had found something she never expected: a sense of belonging. Sarah's old barn had seen many injured animals over the years, but never anything like this. She had laid the strange, scaled being on a clean bed of straw covered with soft blankets. The creature hadn't woken up during the drive back, but her chest rose and fell with steady breaths, and her skin still gave off that faint, warm glow. "Okay, think," Sarah muttered to herself as she gathered medical supplies. What would Dad do? Her father had taught her everything about caring for sick animals before he passed away last spring. Somehow, she didn't think his advice about treating horses would help much with an alien. The cut on the creature's forehead had already stopped bleeding that strange, silvery blood. Sarah carefully cleaned it anyway, noticing how the scales seemed to shift and ripple under her touch. The being made a soft, musical sound, almost like humming. Meanwhile, Princess Lara was fully conscious but unable to move much. Her emergency protocols had kicked in after the crash, putting her body into a healing trance. She could feel everything, though, and was fascinated by the humans' gentle care. On her world, robots handled all medical procedures. This hands-on approach was surprisingly pleasant. Sarah worked through the night, checking for broken bones, none that she could tell, treating small cuts, and making sure her guests stayed warm. By morning, she was exhausted but couldn't bring herself to leave. Instead, she pulled up an old wooden chair and watched the sunrise through the barn doors. A quiet rustling made her turn around. The creature was sitting up, those galaxy-filled eyes now alert and curious. Sarah held very still as the being looked around the barn, taking in the hanging tools, the scattered hay, and the morning light streaming through the windows. "Good morning," Sarah said softly, trying to appear friendly. "Are you feeling better?" The creature tilted her head and made those musical sounds again. Then she pointed to herself and made a series of complex tones that Sarah assumed was her name. "I'm Sarah," she replied, pointing to herself. "Sarah." Lara understood perfectly. Her partially functioning translator could receive Earth languages, but couldn't transmit her own yet. She found it endearing how the human was treating her like a simple creature, even while showing such care. In truth, Lara could have called for rescue immediately, but something made her hesitate. This was a unique opportunity to observe humans in their natural environment. The morning passed in a series of awkward but sweet attempts at communication. Sarah brought food, fresh eggs, toast, and coffee, and watched in amazement as her guest carefully copied her eating methods. The being seemed fascinated by everything, from the texture of the toast to the steam rising from the coffee cup. When Sarah had to go out to tend to the farm, the creature followed her. Lara watched with growing respect as the human worked tirelessly, caring for animals, checking equipment, and managing the vast fields of corn. On her world, machines did all this work. There was something beautiful about the direct connection this human had with her land. To Sarah's surprise, her new pet turned out to be incredibly helpful. Those delicate-looking hands were surprisingly strong, and the being seemed to understand how things worked almost instantly. Together, they fixed a broken tractor faster than Sarah could have alone. By evening, Sarah realized she was no longer afraid. Yes, this was probably an alien, but there was something so human about the way the creature washed her, helped her, and tried to communicate. They had developed a rhythm of sorts, working together as if they'd known each other for years instead of hours. What Sarah didn't know was that her guest was having similar thoughts. Lara had come to Earth expecting to find primitive beings barely worth the celestial dominion's attention. Instead, she had discovered something far more valuable: humanity's capacity for kindness, their adaptability, and their surprising wisdom. And in Sarah Chen, she had found something she never expected: a sense of belonging. The morning started like any other on the Chen farm. Sarah and her alien companion were checking the enhanced corn crops when a deep humming sound filled the air. At first, Sarah thought it was another tractor in the distance, but the sound grew stronger, making the ground vibrate beneath their feet. Her companion suddenly froze, scales shifting to a pale blue color Sarah had never seen before. Above them, the clear autumn sky rippled like water, and 3 massive ships appeared out of nowhere. They were beautiful and terrifying. Silver vessels that looked like giant snowflakes made of light and metal. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, instinctively stepping in front of her friend to protect her. But the alien gently moved Sarah aside, her galaxy eyes fixed on the ships. Beams of light shot down from the vessels, and suddenly the cornfield was filled with beings similar to Sarah's companion. They all had scaled skin in different colors, but their outfits were elaborate and formal, nothing like the simple clothes Sarah had given her friend. A tall figure in gleaming silver robes stepped forward. "Princess Lara, we've been searching across this entire sector for you." Sarah's heart stopped. Princess. But an even bigger shock came next. Captain Zirak, her companion, spoke perfect English, her voice musical and clear. I apologize for causing concern, but my translator was damaged in the crash. Sarah spun around, staring at her friend, at Princess Lara, in disbelief. You can talk." Lara turned to her, eyes filled with worry and affection. "Yes, Sarah. My backup translator finally repaired itself. I've understood everything you've said from the beginning. I just couldn't respond." The other aliens were looking at Sarah now, their expressions a mix of shock and disapproval. Captain Zirak stepped forward, frowning. "Your Highness, you've been living as this farmer's pet. This is completely unacceptable. The heir to the Celestial Dominion, reduced to manual labor." Lara's scales flashed deep purple, a color Sarah had learned meant anger. "I was never a pet. Sarah took care of me when I was injured. She showed me kindness without knowing who or what I was. And the manual labor you look down on, it taught me more about real agricultural science than all my years of theoretical study." The captain looked confused. "But Your Highness, these humans are primitive. They don't even have basic space travel." "Primitive." Lara gestured at the thriving crops around them. "Look at how they work with their environment. Their methods might be simpler than ours, but they understand things we've forgotten. And Sarah," she turned to the stunned farmer, "Sarah has shown me what real strength and wisdom look like." Sarah finally found her voice. You're really a princess." Lara took Sarah's hands in hers. "Yes, I came to Earth as part of our first contact preparation team. The crash wasn't planned, but meeting you—" her scales shifted to a soft pink color Sarah had never seen before. "Meeting you was the best accident of my life." Captain Zirak cleared his throat. "Your Highness, we must return. The Dominion needs you." "Yes," Lara agreed, but didn't let go of Sarah's hands. "But I'm not leaving Sarah behind. She's coming with us." "That's impossible," the captain sputtered. The protocols also say I can choose my own consort," Lara said firmly. "And I choose Sarah Chen of Earth, if she'll have me." Sarah's head was spinning. Just minutes ago, her biggest concern had been fixing the north fence. Now she was being proposed to by an alien princess in front of a bunch of shocked alien nobles. But when she looked into those familiar galaxy eyes, she knew her answer. After all, love was love, whether it came from the farm next door or the other side of the galaxy. What she didn't know was that saying yes would set off a chain of events that would change both their worlds forever. Within 24 hours, Sarah Chen's quiet farm had become the center of the universe. News helicopters circled overhead, held back by a shimmering force field the Celestial Dominion ships had created. Hundreds of reporters gathered at the edge of her property, all desperate to talk to Earth's first potential alien royal consort. Inside the farmhouse, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, trying to process everything. Lara sat beside her, still wearing the simple Earth clothes Sarah had given her, despite her attendant's attempts to dress her in royal garments. "I'm sorry about all this," Lara said softly, her scales shifting to apologetic blue-green. "I should have told you who I was as soon as my translator started working." Sarah looked at her alien princess and couldn't help but smile. "You know what's funny? You're still the same person I've been farming with for the past week. Royal title or not." Lara's scales brightened with joy, but their moment was interrupted by Captain Zirak entering the kitchen with a holographic display. "Your Highness, the Royal Council demands an immediate meeting." And he looked uncomfortably at Sarah. "They have concerns about your choice." The holographic display sprang to life, filling the kitchen with the images of 12 elderly aliens, all wearing elaborate robes and looking very serious. Their scales were muted colors of gray and dark blue, marking their age and status. "Princess Lara," one of them spoke, his voice deep and formal. "While we appreciate your dedication to diplomatic relations, marriage is another matter entirely. The royal bloodline has remained pure for 10,000 years. Lara stood up, her scales flashing with determination. And in those 10,000 years, has anyone bothered to look beyond our own species for strength? Sarah solved our automated farming crisis in one day by suggesting we add natural pollinator systems. Sarah blushed, remembering how she'd casually mentioned that the aliens' perfect hydroponic systems might work better with some earth bees added to the mix. She hadn't realized it would cause such a stir. Nevertheless, another council member said, there are protocols, traditions. The human would need to prove herself worthy according to our ancient laws. Then I'll do it, Sarah said, standing up beside Laura. Every alien in the room turned to look at her, surprised by her confidence. Whatever tests you have, I'll take them. Because I love Laura, princess or not. The council members whispered among themselves while Sarah felt her face grow hot. She hadn't meant to blurt out the love part so publicly, but Lara's scales had turned that beautiful pink color again, so maybe it wasn't such a bad slip. Very well, the head counselor finally said. The human Sarah Chen will undergo the traditional trials of worthiness. But be warned, no off-worlder has ever passed them. After the council disappeared, Captain Zyrak looked at Sarah with something like pity. The trials are extremely difficult. They were designed to test alien royalty with advanced technological capabilities. Sarah felt a moment of doubt. But then she felt Lara's hand slip into hers. She remembered how they'd worked together on the farm, combining Lara's advanced knowledge with her practical experience. Maybe that's what these trials needed, a fresh perspective. When do we start? Sarah asked. Tomorrow, Zyrak replied. And Miss Chen, the media is reporting that you're Earth's first alien princess consort, but that's not quite true. You're the first being from any world that Princess Lara's line has considered worthy of courtship in over 3 centuries. As he left, Sarah looked out her kitchen window. Beyond the force field, she could see the media circus growing. Her simple life had vanished the moment those ships appeared, but looking at Lara, she knew it was worth it. She just hoped her farming skills would somehow help her pass those ancient alien trials. The fate of more than just their relationship might depend on it. The first trial took place in a massive holographic chamber aboard the largest celestial Dominion ship. Sarah stood in the center, wearing her usual farm clothes despite being offered elaborate alien garments. Lara watched nervously from an observation deck above, her scales shifting between worried gray and hopeful blue. The trial of intelligence, announced Captain Zyrak. You must solve 3 problems that even our best minds find challenging. The air around Sarah shimmered, and suddenly she was surrounded by floating symbols and equations. They were unlike anything she'd ever seen. Complex alien mathematics that seemed to twist in impossible ways. But Sarah wasn't intimidated. Years of calculating crop yields, feed ratios, and equipment efficiencies had taught her to see patterns. She looked at the alien math and saw something familiar. It was like planning crop rotations, just in multiple dimensions. It's about balance, she said quietly, reaching out to rearrange the floating symbols. Just like balancing soil nutrients across different fields. The aliens gasped as she solved the first problem using farming analogies. The second problem involved predicting energy patterns, which Sarah compared to predicting weather patterns for crops. The third was about resource distribution, which was exactly what she did every day managing her farm. She passed the first trial in record time. The second trial was physical. Sarah found herself in what looked like an alien obstacle course, with challenges designed for beings with advanced technological enhancements. The trial of strength, Zyrak explained. Most nobles use their biotechnology to complete this. Sarah looked at the course and smiled. I don't need technology. I've been lifting hay bales and fixing tractors my whole life. She attacked the course with the practical strength and agility of someone used to physical labor. Where others might have used anti-gravity devices to climb, she used the climbing skills learned from fixing her barn roof. When faced with heavy objects to move, she applied simple leverage principles she used with farm equipment. The Royal Council watched in amazement as this primitive human completed the course through sheer practical experience and physical capability. But the third trial was the hardest, the trial of character. Sarah was presented with a series of complex moral dilemmas through virtual reality. Each scenario was designed to test her values and decision-making. In these situations, there is often no clear right answer, Zyrak warned. Sarah approached each problem the same way she approached farming, with patience, compassion, and practical wisdom. When shown a scenario about resource distribution, she applied the same principles she used when helping neighboring farms during tough times. When faced with a diplomatic crisis, she used the same mediation skills she'd learned from settling disputes at the local farmers' market. As the final trial ended, Sarah removed the virtual reality device to find the entire Royal Council standing before her in person. Their scales showed colors of surprise and reluctant respect. "You've passed all 3 trials," the head counselor announced. "Not just passed, you've shown us new ways to solve old problems. Your farming experience has proven surprisingly applicable to galactic governance." Lara rushed down from the observation deck, her scales blazing with joy and pride. "I told you Sarah was special. She shows that humanity's supposed primitive nature is actually their strength. They understand fundamental truths that we've forgotten in our rush for technological advancement." Sarah hugged Lara, not caring about the formal protocol anymore. "Does this mean we can get married?" The head counselor's scales shifted to a formal purple. "There is still opposition within the Dominion. Some believe that allowing a human into the royal family will weaken our empire. You've earned the right to court Princess Lara, but expect resistance." What none of them knew was that this resistance was already taking shape. In the shadows of the Celestial Dominion, forces were gathering to stop this unprecedented union. Forces that would soon test not just Sarah and Lara's love, but humanity's place in the galaxy. The emergency meeting of the Celestial Dominion Council was interrupted by blaring alarms. On the massive holographic display, red warning signals flashed across star systems. The alien counselors' scales turned pale with fear as they realized what was happening. Their automated farming systems were failing across multiple worlds. The artificial pollination network has completely collapsed, one technician reported, his scales a sickly green. Crop failure rates are at 90% and rising. Lara stood among them, her mind racing. Billions of lives depended on these automated farms. Then she remembered something. Sarah's way of working with nature instead of trying to control it completely. "Bring Sarah Chen here," Lara commanded. Some counselors started to object, but she cut them off. "She's the only person I know who understands farming as a living system, not just a technological one." When Sarah arrived, she was still wearing her work boots and had dirt on her jeans from morning chores. The counselors looked down at her simple clothes with disdain, but Sarah ignored them. She was too busy studying the complex holograms of the failing farm systems. "You're fighting nature," she said finally. "That's your problem." "What do you mean?" asked the head counselor. "Our systems are perfect, or they were until this virus infected them." Sarah walked through the hologram, pointing at different parts. "That's exactly it. You're trying to make everything perfect and controlled. But farming isn't about control. It's about partnership with nature." She turned to Lara. "Remember how we fixed your crashed ship's garden module? We added earth bees and let nature do what it does best." "But that was one small garden," a counselor objected. "We're talking about feeding trillions of people across hundreds of worlds." Sarah smiled. "Then we'll need a lot of bees, and butterflies, and all kinds of natural pollinators from different worlds. But first, we need to change how your systems work." Over the next few days, Sarah worked with Lara and the Dominion scientists. She showed them how to adapt their advanced technology to work with natural processes instead of replacing them. They created new hybrid systems that combined the best of Earth's natural farming methods with alien technology. To everyone's surprise, it worked better than the old system ever had. Crop yields increased. The food tasted better. And most importantly, the systems were no longer vulnerable to cascading failures because they had nature's resilience built in. But not everyone was happy about these changes. A group of powerful technology manufacturers who had grown rich from the old automated systems saw their profits threatened. They began spreading rumors that Sarah was deliberately sabotaging the Dominion's technology to make Earth look better. Lara fought back against these accusations. She called a public meeting of the council and gave a passionate speech. "Look at what Sarah Chen has taught us," she declared, her scales glowing with conviction. "We thought we were superior because of our advanced technology. But she showed us that true advancement means working in harmony with nature, not trying to conquer it." She gestured at the new farming systems. "This is why I love her. Not just because she's brave or kind, but because she brings wisdom our civilization had forgotten." The marriage between her Earth knowledge and our technology is exactly what the Dominion needs. Sarah blushed as Lara took her hand in front of everyone. But she stood tall, knowing she had helped save billions of lives by sharing her simple farming wisdom. The head counselor's scales shifted to a formal gold color, a sign of highest respect. "Sarah Chen, you have done more than earn the right to marry our princess. You have shown us a new path forward. The Dominion will never be the same." But even as celebrations began across the galaxy, the technology manufacturers were making their final moves. Soon, Sarah and Lara would face their greatest challenge yet, one that would decide not just their future, but the future of both their civilizations. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and crisp over Sarah Chen's cornfield. It was the same field where she had found Lara months ago, though it looked very different now. The corn stood tall and healthy, a perfect blend of earth crops and alien enhancement. Floating lights danced between the stalks, and the morning sunlight sparkled off the force field that kept the thousands of reporters at bay. But Sarah wasn't thinking about any of that as she stood in her farmhouse bedroom, looking in the mirror. Her wedding dress combined earth and alien styles, flowing white fabric embedded with living scales that shifted colors to match her emotions. Right now, they were flickering between excited pink and nervous blue. "You look beautiful," said a familiar musical voice. Lara stood in the doorway, her own royal robes shimmering with joy. They had insisted on keeping the Earth tradition of not seeing each other before the wedding, but Lara couldn't stay away any longer. "There's something you need to know," Lara said urgently. "The technology manufacturers, they're planning something. Our security forces intercepted messages." Sarah smiled and took Lara's scaled hands in hers. "I know. That's why I invited them all to the wedding." Lara's scales flickered with surprise. "You what?" "Remember what you learned about farming. Sometimes the best way to deal with a problem isn't to fight it, but to find a way to make it work for you." The wedding ceremony began at noon. Thousands of guests from across the galaxy gathered in the cornfield, their different colored scales creating a beautiful light show. Earth diplomats stood alongside alien nobles. Farmers from neighboring counties sat next to beings from distant stars. Sarah had insisted that the manufacturers attend, placing them in seats of honor. As the ceremony began, they watched suspiciously, waiting for their moment to protest this unprecedented union. But Sarah had a surprise for them. During the traditional exchange of gifts, she presented not just her vows to Lara, but a new business proposal to the Dominion. The manufacturers would not lose their livelihoods. Instead, they would lead the development of new hybrid farming systems, combining their technology with Earth's natural methods. "On my farm, we learned that the best solutions come from working together," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the field. "Earth and the Dominion, nature and technology, tradition and progress. We're stronger when we combine our strengths instead of fighting over differences." Lara's scales glowed with pride and love as she added, "This is why I chose Sarah. She doesn't just solve problems. She brings people together. She sees connections that others miss." The manufacturers, who had come ready to fight, found themselves drawn into Sarah's vision of a new future. By the end of the ceremony, they were among the loudest supporters of the Union. The wedding feast that followed was unlike anything Earth or the Dominion had ever seen. Earth corn and alien fruits filled tables that stretched through the fields. Bees buzzed happily around alien flowers, demonstrating the success of Sarah's farming methods. Children from both worlds played together between the corn stalks, their laughter mixing with the musical language of the Dominion. As the sun set, Sarah and Lara slipped away from the celebration to stand in the exact spot where they first met. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, looking up at the stars that no longer seemed so distant. Lara's scales shifted to the soft pink that Sarah now knew meant deep love. "Now we do what farmers do best. We grow something new together. The Dominion needs both of us, your wisdom and my knowledge." "And the farm?" "The farm stays," Lara said firmly. "It will be our home and a symbol of cooperation between our worlds." Besides, she added with a musical laugh, "someone needs to keep teaching the galaxy about the importance of good old-fashioned dirt farming." Sarah leaned against her alien princess, watching their guests celebrate. In the end, she was still just a farmer who believed in working with nature instead of against it. She had helped teach that lesson to beings from across the stars, and in doing so, had changed the course of two civilizations. Love, like farming, was about helping things grow. And with Lara by her side, Sarah knew they would grow something beautiful together.